And now, the general weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook for the end of the week, Thursday into Friday. It is Wednesday, March 13th, and checking the sea ice, we are noting that the ice has certainly advanced southward over the past several days, as was expected given that plunge of Arctic air coming in on northerly flow here over the course of the weekend and early this week. And the leading edge of the ice could very well make it to the Pribilof Islands to around St. Paul. But as we expect here, there's going to be a pattern shift coming up next week. Winds are going to go back around to the south-southwest, and this ice will retreat northward next week as we get milder air coming in up from the North Pacific and lower Bering Sea. And the weather system's storm track will be readjusting and bringing more active weather along areas of the west coast here, especially by middle and the latter part of next week. Right now, though, active weather is in place. We have a low pressure system that'll be coming onshore near and just east of Cape Suckling very late tonight and on Thursday morning. The frontal system with it has gusty winds, rain along the coast and in the sea level elevations. But as you go upwards here in the northern panhandle along the Haines and Klondike highways, the higher elevations there could pick up 6 to as much as 10 inches of snow this Wednesday evening into Thursday morning, along with some wind gusts up around 50-55 miles an hour. And that's one system to get by. We still have Arctic high pressure across the north slope back into eastern Russia, and then another system way off here, low pressure along the Kamchatka coast, with a front arcing into the western Aleutians. For Thursday afternoon, the one low moves northeastward up into the lower Yukon with a front trailing south. This boundary stalls out, waiting for the next low that's going to lift northward over the weekend and then pull back to the eastern Kenai coast. High pressure will stay in place here along the north slope back into the Gulf of Anadyr, and then we have front that continues to try to press eastward in through the western Aleutians. So Friday afternoon, here's the situation. We have warmer, milder air here out over the North Pacific, southeast portion of the Gulf and Panhandle, and that warmer air is going to back northwestward here over the weekend. This is going to send another round of precipitation to areas of the western northern Gulf. Actually renewing the precipitation here in the northern panel, but it's going to then kind of retrograde westward here as we go through the weekend. Meanwhile, still cold air stays entrenched up along the Arctic coast and the north slope. The initial front kind of washes out along the Aleutian chain, but we're going to start to see a more active pattern develop next week across the Bering, and that's going to allow milder air to stream northward across much of the mainland. So in the meantime, south winds 30-35 knots here, inner channels on Thursday. Waves running 7 feet, Lynn Canal 5 feet, Stevens Passage as much as 10-13 feet, Dixon Entrance. The outer coast southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with swells generally running right around 15 to 17 feet. For Friday, winds will be southeasterly, inner channels 20 knots with gust up to 35 knots. Lynn Canal, waves there 4 feet or so, 4 feet there, Stevens Passage, and 6-7 feet. Dixon Entrance there around Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Outer nearshore waters of the outer coast, look for east-southeast winds 20-25 knots, Gustavus southward with swells of 9 to 12 feet. And generally east winds there in the vicinity of outside of Yakutat Bay and swells 8 to 9 feet. Across the northwest Gulf, on Thursday, winds will be northwest 20 knots within Prince William Sound with 3-4 foot waves. Westerly winds to 25 knots off the Kenai coast, and west-northwest winds 25 knots there, lower Cook Inlet to northeast of Kodiak Island with 5 to 6 foot swells. Ice still in place there, middle upper Cook Inlet. And then for Friday, with the next low way down there in the North Pacific, going to make a track toward the Kenai coastline here this weekend. We expect winds to start to turn out of the northeast. Initially variable 10 knots here outside off the Kenai coast, but 10 to 15 knots around Prince William Sound, outside here of Hinchinbrook Entrance, and then northeast winds 15 knots, anchor point down through lower Cook Inlet with 4 foot waves. Look for 20 knot westerly winds around Kodiak Island on Thursday, and then as we trail down along the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds to 15 knots on the North Pacific side, variable winds to northwesterly winds 10 to 15 knots on the Bering side. And then for Friday, winds are going to turn northeasterly across Kodiak Island 15 to 15 knots or so. And then as we trail down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, we're looking at north-northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, waves 4 or 5 feet on the North Pacific side, and once you get away from the pack ice, 3-foot waves there north, especially of Cold Bay. The eastern Aleutians will see north-northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. They'll shift around southeasterly, Atka westward through Adak, and increase to 35 to 45 knot gales, especially west of Adak and out toward Shemya in response to that approaching front. For Friday, look for generally northeast winds around 15-20 knots. Eastern Aleutians, they'll become more easterly, 25 to 30 knots, Atka through Adak westward, and then southeasterly 15 to 25 knots in the vicinity of the far western Aleutians around Shemya. For the southwest coast, north winds continue, a northerly component upwards of 20 knots along the leading edge of the pack ice. So again, we expect during the day Thursday the ice to advance southward some more. And then north winds 15 knots there within Norton Sound and along the outer Yukon coast. For Friday, still northerly component to the winds, 15 to 20 knots, so the ice will continue advancing southward here across the southeast Bering and along areas of the Bering Strait, 15 to 20 knot winds there, west side of the Seward Peninsula, north side of St. Lawrence Island, ice in place there. A mixed bag of winds once you get off of Cape, Lisburn, Point, Lay, and Wainwright, but winds turning more westerly, 15 to 20 knots there, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, so that doesn't really help the wind chill situation there. And then for Friday, we're looking for winds southwest-west, 10 to 15 knots along the central eastern Arctic coast, turning northeasterly, increasing 10 to 15 knots. Down from Wainwright to Cape Lisburn and Point Hope, and then northeast to north winds through the Bering Strait. And we expect on, as we pass south of the Bering Strait, west of Wales, Port Clarence, north side of St. Lawrence Island, winds will generally have a northerly component around 10 to 15 knots.